Hello, friends. This is Michael Robbins, and I'm broadcasting here from north of the Arctic Circle, kind of at the top of the world, and substituting for my wife Tuya, who usually does these programs. We will be resuming our work with the individual nations and invoking the soul of these individual nations when we return to the south. Right now we're almost 70 degrees north latitude. This is part of the Ask series of programs. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. It's the basis of the science of invocation, which will be the new and great science of the coming Aquarian age. We will learn how successfully to call upon, in a scientific manner, the energies which we need to help express the divine plan on our planet. So, as you probably know, on Wednesday nights Wednesday night or morning, it depends. We alternate 5 a.m. GMT, 5 p.m. GMT, trying to give everybody a chance to participate, as sometimes either one of those might be in the middle of the night for some people. So the triangles work. Indispensable is done on Wednesday, the reappearance of the Christ meditation on Thursday, the webinar, one webinar and 4 broadcasts, one webinar on glamour, the dissipation of glamour, is done on Friday. And this is Saturday night. This is the Invoking the Soul of Nations, and we're working in the book The Destiny of the Nations. And then on Sunday, the Attracting Money for Hierarchical Purposes. And of course, our usual pre-full moon and full moon activities, as well as the special broadcasts for the Blue Rose Sisterhood, which just so everybody knows, includes men as well as women, the Blue Rose Sisters and the Shiva Brothers, all for the purpose of helping the human personality give birth to the presence of the soul. This is the birth of the Christ within the Virgin, within the personality, and eventually within the entire planet, as the Mother Mary is really the planet Earth. That's part of the symbolism. So there are a lot of broadcasts going forth and more special programs to come, and do go to the Makara website, www.makara.us, and you will find a lot of these programs that you can catch up with if you like, as well as a lot of material, instructional material and meditative material according to the teaching of Master DK. Well, what we've been doing lately is to, read in that wonderful book, The Destiny of the Nations. And this is a book written in the 1940s and tells us so much about the ideal interaction of the various nations of the world according to their rays and or their astrological signs, what they are supposed to be if they really express their soul. Every nation has a soul ray and a personality ray, just as a human being does, and obviously the soul ray is to come into expression. Maybe one day as well a monadic ray will appear, but that would be getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit, I think. So we have been looking at the contrast between the 6th ray and the 7th ray. And now I'll switch over here to the text, hoping all goes well. There we go. Okay. Sometimes the technology gets a little bit ahead of me. So we were reading about, first about the sixth ray and its expression of higher values through devotion. Devotion is no small thing. You know, sometimes we think of it as a limitation and an attitude of the personality who is emotionally polarized, but in fact the soul has great devotion to the development of its personality, and we as monads are called lords of ceaseless and persevering devotion. So we continue with some of this work, thinking about what the sixth ray is, and the various objectives of those who are functioning either on the sixth or seventh ray. Basically, people are divided into two, well, maybe three categories. Those who are still working under the influence in general of the sixth ray Piscean age, and those who have transferred their attention and their efforts to the seventh ray Aquarian age. And then DK tells us there are quite a number of people caught between these contrasting energies and are quite confused as a result. So it's up to people like us to clarify the purpose of the seventh ray in relation to the sign Aquarius, and to help humanity make its transition into a greater unfoldment according to the energies of the new age. Not only, of course, do we have the smaller age of Aquarius, which is, let's say, technically 2160 years, or more generally 2500 years, but we have the larger age of Aquarius due, I think, to begin in a few hundred years. You know, DK says that the astrology of man cannot determine when this greater 25,000 year period will begin. Of course, that's a rounded off figure, and maybe there's a lot more to it, you know, maybe almost 26,000 years. Those technicalities are in the minds of the Masters of the Wisdom, and gradually we are allowed to know what they are, so we can help determine our behavior according to the times and cycles as we attempt to express the divine plan. So let's begin with a little bit of reading from the Destiny of the Nations, continuing where we were before. The second objective of the sixth ray disciple, or of the man who is emerging out of the sixth ray influence, but is still conditioned by it, being a representative human being from the current evolutionary angle. And this tells us, you know, that the great majority of human beings at this time are still emotionally polarized. And of course very few are mentally polarized, but quite a number are becoming mentally focused. To be truly mentally polarized means that you're somewhere between the second and third initiation, the midway point, and this is rather rare. So we do have, you know, the Atlantean period is still with us, even though we are within the Aryan age. So many people still have the Atlantean sixth ray consciousness. So we're talking about the objectives of those who are working still under the influence of the sixth ray, even if they may be emerging constructively from it. Of course, there are those who are absolutely retrogressive with respect to the sixth ray and are now evidencing its most fanatical and reactionary aspects. And this, of course, is trying to pull civilization backwards, but of course it cannot succeed, however much temporary suffering it may induce. So this objective, the second objective, has to do with the person emerging, but from the sixth ray influence, but conditioned by it. And he has been on the unfolding, we call it, of the capacity for abstraction, as it is called. Now, this ray is called the ray of devotion, the ray of idealism, but it's also called the ray of abstract idealism. It's interestingly, the names of the sixth ray Lord is so interesting, and we'll have to go to esoteric psychology too to take a look at that, but the hater of the form is one of the names of this great Lord, and of course that is a rejection of the kinds of forms in which the soul is clothed. Now, that can lead to great excesses, but at least we see the power of abstraction there, and we see how it's possible to pull back a long way, even to the point of having the perspective one day of the monad, which is, in a way, very much conditioned by the sixth ray in general, because it is a lord of ceaseless, persevering devotion. And it's that devotion, that life of devotion which sends the monad, which is each one of us, emanatively down into the five lower worlds on a great pilgrimage of redemption. So let's just call it this capacity for abstraction has been evolving, but the problem is, of course, people may abstract from the present circumstances and lose what is called common sense. So DK tells that for the individual on this ray, common sense is a great requirement. And interestingly enough, the sixth sense, in the way DK tells us about the senses, is called the common sense, as it synthesizes the earlier five, and the seventh is the esoteric sense. The outstanding quality of our day, he says, and period, as a result of transmuting human quality and character in and through its disciples. So there's a requirement for us. If we would be disciples, we have to lead forward in this transmutation of human character and human energy and human quality, and set an example about that, so that others can recognize. I'm remembering in the book called The Initiate, he appeared and talked to average human beings, and his character was of such a nature that they simply stood in awe of what his attitudes were. They were so unselfish, and as a result of that, he had transmuted so much as a master, of course, they tried to emulate him. So disciples transmute quality and character, and the result of this, the outstanding quality, has been the expression of the idealistic nature of man. Now, it's often said that, when the sixth ray works through the astral body, we have devotion, and when it works through the personality, we have idealism, or maybe through the mind. It has been the expression of the idealistic nature of man, or of his instinctual response to the higher intuitional values. What are those intuitional values? Well, they come into our life when the Buddhic stream of energy, the plane of intuition, becomes tangible. And of course that can come through the various petals, not in a pure form, but the various petals of the egoic lotus. To really contact the direct, straight knowledge of the intuition, we need the antakarana, quite well built so that it can touch that Buddhic vehicle, which is being organized. And it's not so much organized until definitely after the second initiation, and more probably after the third. But in any case, we have a developing instinctual response, an automatic response to the higher intuitional values. And the sixth ray leads us there. There is a lot of sixth ray connected with the Buddhic plane, because Buddhi is the sixth principle. He tells us that in the past, highly developed but rare people have here and there demonstrated this power to abstract the consciousness from the material or form side of life, and to focus it upon the ideal and upon the formless expressions of living truth. Well, this is very good. Of course, it can lead to the utterly mystical consciousness, where a person loses practicality and is so deeply immersed in the higher streams of energy that the normal life of the earth is not properly attended to. And D.K. tells us in this book that this is the reason for the unusual disorganization of humanity's life at this time, because the sixth ray has lifted people into such a condition that they don't pay attention to the here and now. But that's not true of the really highly developed sixth ray type. I'm thinking about someone like Father Damien, a fourth degree initiate who was out there on Molokai Island, tending to the needs of the colonies of those who had leprosy, and he had to do everything. He had to be extremely practical in taking care of their needs, even though obviously, at least to me, he was a sixth ray soul, very highly developed sixth ray soul. But he was Capricorn, so he had that practical streak as needed. So in the past, highly developed but rare people have here and there demonstrated this power to abstract the consciousness from the material forms side of life, just question yourself about it, and to focus it upon the ideal and upon the formless expressions of living truth. Now, how does truth live? Well, the perspectives that are found in the higher ethers are alive. When we live in the three lower planes, we're half dead, I'm afraid. But when we finally work ourselves into a livingness within the four higher cosmic ethers, Buddhi, Atma, the monadic plane, and the logoic plane, then things begin to live, just like ether brings us vitality. Vitality is livingness. Today, whole masses of people and entire nations are regimented, now whether that's good or bad, but there they are, regimented to certain forms of idealism. They don't have that broad inclusive idealism yet, but at least they're being trained along specific lines of idealism, and can and do appreciate ideas, not fully, but as formulated into ideals. We're all for an idea when we have the ideal of the idea, but we don't necessarily understand the idea completely. But it's a stage. The idea appeals to us, and we make it into an object of reverence, of aspiration, and then we are oriented towards it and try to help others or force others also to be oriented towards that particular idea. One day later, with real mental focus and real polarization, there comes the ability to completely appreciate the idea from a soul, a mental perspective, which is soul illumined. So complete many people, in the 1940s, 30s, 20s, and all that, and even now, were oriented towards ideas as idealism could conceive those ideas. Thus, again, this is a positive note, the success of the evolutionary process can be seen, and the work of the hierarchy as it endeavors to expand human consciousness, a big Jupiterian act, can be demonstrated to be effective. So even though the ideals can get a bit out of control, it still represents progress from the way it used to be. We'll go on a little more. Because of the potency of the sixth ray activity, owing to the long period wherein it has been expressing itself, well, kind of wonder how long, certainly for 2,000 years, 2,500 years, but then, we're emerging from a greater age of Pisces, which is a 25,000 year age. And you kind of wonder whether the sixth ray was active during that entire age. And we're told as well that we have still, in a larger perspective, 21,000 years left of sixth ray activity. It's on a very high sixth ray cycle. Anyway, it's been around a long time, this trying to elevate humanity through the sixth ray. So due to its potency and its long period of expression, the reaction of the average human being is one of intense devotion to his particular ideal. Well, it may be a spiritual ideal, a religious ideal, a social ideal, it can even be a material ideal. But anyway, there's an intense devotion of the average man to his particular ideal, plus the effort, even the average man, fanatically, to impose his idealistic dream, for that is all it potentially is, upon his fellow men, and to do so in such a form that unfortunately the original idea is lost and the primal ideal is destroyed, and the devotee becomes much more occupied with the method of applying his ideal than by the ideal itself. So maybe you might say that the ideal has descended into the idol. The idea, the ideal, the idol. And we see this going on in the world today. It's the most primitive kind of thing, and it's been found here and there during the last couple of thousand years. It's called forced conversion. You will believe as I do, you will think as I do, you will show your devotion as I do, or watch out, even on pain of death if you don't think the way I do. So, this is a very great limitation of how the sixth ray expresses itself, and if we thought we're done with it, we're absolutely not done with it. There's all kinds of convert or die programs going on in the world today. And of course, it takes a lot of mental capacity to really understand an idea. So when you're all emotionally revved up about an ideal, and you're even forgetting the highest aspects of the ideal, but are just trying to force it into incarnation, well, we lose the plot, I'm afraid. And this kind of reactionary expression of the sixth ray is something that really must fade away from the present mode in which it is being expressed and forced upon others. Thus the idea, because where do ideas come from anyway? I mean, in a way they don't really start until we reach the Buddhic plane, and then on and on upward. Perhaps the true ideas as we think of them in ways we can think of them come from the cosmic Buddhic plane and beyond. As a matter of fact, the whole universe is an idea, really, and every one of us is also an idea. So the lowest expression of a true idea is Buddhic, even though we consider it to be a very high expression compared to our ideals of the idea. Thus the idea is lost in the ideal, and the ideal in its turn is lost in the method of its application. The man becomes the devotee of an ideal which may or may not be embodied in an individual expression. This ideal controls his thoughts, foreordains his activities, and leads him frequently to merciless excesses in the interest of his peculiar and formulated idea, the idea that's been formulated into an ideal, or an idea which has been idealized. There's a big fear here when you have to compel other people to think just as you do. The presence of other modes of thought is a threat to you because you're still rather insecure. You idealize something, but you haven't really experienced it, you see. And it's only in the experience that real psychological security comes. So if you compel everybody around you to be the same, you are not threatened by contrast. And, so many cannot tolerate variety, because it seems somehow to undermine their very shaky certitude that their ideal is correct. So there's a deep insecurity here in the sixth ray, and as it becomes, instead of outward looking, more inward looking towards its own willful center, a greater amount of spiritual security is established. So, okay, these are, different things about, first he deals with the sixth ray, and then he's going to deal with the seventh. I don't think we're going to quite finish a discussion of the sixth ray this evening here, but we probably will next time, and then move on into the seventh ray, and then keep the contrast between these two rays in mind. Remember, this is not saying that you have a sixth ray this or a seventh ray that. It's a larger type of thing as to whether you, with whatever rays you have, are responding to the new impulses and the new trends, or whether you are more of the reactionary type, clinging to that which is already established. Under the immediate expression of the sixth ray, the divine principle of desire, and we have to notice that so we don't denigrate desire and imagine that it's some low thing. Master Moria told us we'll never get rid of desire, we just have to co-measure our desires in terms of some higher objective. Desire, in a way, is that which puts the whole universe together after it's been divided, apparently, into multiplicity. So anyway, under the immediate expression of the sixth ray, the divine principle of desire has shifted potently away from the desire for material form into the realm of higher desire, the reorientation of desire. And this becomes aspiration at a certain point. It depends on how high we reach and what are the objectives of that sort of magnetic yearning towards something we do not yet possess and something we do not yet relate to, that magnetic yearning to incorporate that something else so it becomes a part of ourselves. So, we're shifting away from materialism, and he's told us, that with the development of atomic energy, the death blow of materialism has been struck. And, of course, the masters tend to look at things in a rather large sense. They look at things in terms of centuries, and maybe we have a much shorter scope of assessment. But in any case, the death knell of materialism has been sounded with the realization that matter is energy, and energy is precipitated matter. Okay, so though materialism is still rampant, and we do see that, especially under the abuse of the third ray, the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, it's really a question about our desires. The orientation, a low orientation of desire might be the root of all evil, and money facilitates that low orientation, or it can facilitate a much higher orientation. But we do see a tremendous manipulation of world resources at the present time, which is interrupting the divine circulatory flow, and is creating areas of glut and areas of dearth. So there is not this divine circulatory flow and right distribution of the means by which man must live, the energies that sustain life, and this will be corrected under the seventh ray in Aquarius, and through the expression of certain seventh ray first degree initiates who will begin to manage this distribution of energy in a fairer manner. So though materialism is still rampant, we can see it. Wall Street is often the symbol of this kind of rampant materialism. There are few people who are not animated by certain definite idealistic aspirations for which they are ready, when needed, to make sacrifices. And, everybody has this idealism because we have been conditioned during the age of Pisces to become idealistic under the sixth ray. We've had quite a few incarnations in the age of Pisces, and the sixth ray has been prominent. So whatever our rays may be, we have this orientation towards something higher, and not just immersion in this kind of Lemurian way of living, which just deals with the senses, what the senses reveal, and desire for the instinctual satisfactions that relate to the senses. So man has become reasonably idealistic. And DK tells us it's a relatively new phenomenon and one that should be carefully noted. Well, I wonder if we realize, how far we've come here, this the changing of the materialist into the incipient idealist. Down the ages, great sons of God have ever been ready to die for an idea. Now notice that's an idea, even an ideal. They understood the idea if they were a great son of God. Today, whole masses of men are equally ready and have done so. Whether it is the idea, and here we can, kind of question our own values here. We don't have to approve of what he's going to say here, but it's just factual that they are oriented idealistically and sacrificially towards these types of objectives. Whether it is the idea of the superhuman state, empire or nation, or some response to a major world need, humanitarian projects and so forth, ending starvation, ending poverty, those kinds of recognition of human needs and the giving of oneself sacrificially to meeting those needs, or some potent adherence to some current ideology. I'm sometimes, some of the actors in our present Hollywood situation are really involved with Scientology. They're very idealistically devoted to that kind of thing. And this is their reach into spirituality. This indicates phenomenal racial achievement and the pronounced success of the hierarchy to shift human attention into the world from whence ideas emerge and onto the higher and less material values. Well, we can talk about the world of the higher mind, the world of the soul. We don't even have to talk about the Buddhic plane. Most people are not so much connected with the Buddhic plane yet, but as it filters through the egoic lotus, the causal body, the Buddhic influence of ideas is reached. So DK is quite positive here about what these developments are, even if the objective that stimulates the ideal is not necessarily a positive objective. The superhuman state, well, there we have Nazism and the idea of what Germany became in the Second World War, a superhuman state above all other states. But on the other hand, there is a superhuman state which is different from a nation, and that's the status that we might achieve as a spiritual being. So sometimes it doesn't make any difference, that about which you are idealistic, as long as the idealism is pure and sacrifices are made and the perspective will later be corrected. Let's see, maybe just a little bit more here. The instinct which has characterized this passing six-ray period and which has been noticeably fostered under the influence, its influence is that of taste. Now, this is kind of interesting because usually the sixth ray is associated with smell and the fourth ray is associated with taste, at least in some of DK's lists that you'll find beginning page 188 in a treatise on cosmic fire. So anyway, the sense of taste in food, in human intercourse, in color, in form, it's a kind of a refined attitude of appreciation, what you want to ingest and what you do not want to ingest, what you will incorporate, make part of your body or part of your energy system, and what you will refuse. So oftentimes we smell something before we taste it. Smell is the precursor of taste, and that's where the sixth ray comes in. But also during this Piscean sixth ray age, a more refined sense of that with which we will associate ourselves has been developed. It's in all these things: food, human interchange, color, in form, in art, and in architecture, and in all branches of human knowledge. It suggests discrimination. And under discrimination, of course, comes the fourth ray, and we'll see why in a minute. This discriminating taste, it's associated with the fourth subplane of the mental plane, which is just on the periphery of the higher mind, and the city or faculty of which is called discrimination. So with proper discrimination, we can tell the difference between what is of the personality and what is of the soul, and we can choose the soul or the higher mind. This discriminating taste has reached a relatively high stage of development during the past 2,000 years, and, quote, good taste is a highly cherished mass virtue and objective today. It shows that we are no longer willing to be associated with that which is crude, which is rotten, which is degenerating, which is of low value or quality. So we're building something new. You know, the soul is the quality of life, and we're building in the soul because we are going for those things which have quality rather than just anything. So, and now DK tells us this is a totally new thing, and one which has been hitherto the prerogative of the highly cultured few. Now notice the idea of Venus coming in here. Venus is the planet of taste, planet of refinement, a planet of attraction, and that which one draws to oneself, to incorporate within oneself. And interestingly about Venus, it has a very powerful sixth ray on the monadic level. So we reach the ideal in terms of the quality that we want to associate with. So anyway, this is a new thing, and he asks us to ponder on this because only the highly cultured few had it before, and now many more do. It connotes evolutionary achievement. For the disciples of the world, this sense of taste can be transmuted into its higher correspondence, a discriminating sense of values. In other words, trying to live according to soul values, which can be discerned when we understand what the laws of the soul are: sacrifice, magnetic impulse, service, repulsing that which is not of the soul, group progress, and then two others, expansive response, and the lower four. Those are very high things and not so accessible to us, but up to the level of group progress and group values we can understand. So disciples have to develop a discriminating sense of values, really a sense of soul values according to the laws of the soul. Hence the clear emphasis laid in all textbooks on discipleship upon the need to develop discrimination. There we are, the fourth subplane of the mental plane again, discriminating between soul values on the higher three subplanes where the egoic lotus is found, and then on all the lower 18 subplanes where the personality is expressing. So he gives us a summary here: desire, taste, discrimination. And it's progressive. These are the values under the sixth ray for all evolutionary unfoldment, and peculiarly the goal of all disciples. Well, okay, I think that should be enough to get us started. And what I'll do here, if just a little bit, just to remind myself, because I oftentimes forget where we are, which is not good. Anyway, this is end of reading for Invocation of the Soul of Nations, and our date here is 24 September and 16. So we'll begin here next time, and okay, there we go. We'll begin here next time, but we keep these things in mind because they are so very important, and it tells us in fact how we are progressing as a race, as a race of human beings. And the role that, even though we sometimes look at the sixth ray in a somewhat pejorative sense, because of the excesses, the merciless excesses that are presently expressing, we would be much farther behind in our development if we had not been, and are still being in the larger cycle, subjected to the influence of the sixth ray. Okay. So let me go back to the other images. And I'll just say that as we do this work, always keep your triangles in mind, and you will find also an abbreviated manner of representing your triangles to yourself with the full quality of soul, of goodwill, of love, of light, so that you can link up very quickly with your fellow triangle members and feel the higher energies flowing through them. If we want to deal with the coming expression of the souls of nations, one of the great conduits is, of course, the triangles network. Okay. And we remember as well, as we prepare to meditate on these matters, that all this is done on behalf of the Christ and for the sake of the Christ, because after all, He is the Redeemer and the Savior of humanity and the great teacher, and for 2,000 years He'll be with us in one way or another, although maybe only His own will recognize Him, but more and more, I think, will recognize Him. Think of it, He was with us through the Master Jesus, or the Initiate Jesus, for 3 years. 3 years of His public ministry. And now, once He reappears, once humanity has taken the first initiation, He'll be with us for about 2,000 years. This will be, in a more visible, tangible manner. This will be incredibly transformational. So, as we think together of humanity and its various nations and the redemption of the nations, helping the redemption of humanity, we say, we have gathered in your name, Lord Maitreya, be with us. We have gathered in your name, Lord Maitreya, be with us. And just as we have chakras, the planet has various systems of chakras. Sometimes they are continents, considered as continents. Sometimes they are centers or city centers in various continents, and we all work under one or other, so we will want to always attune with the planetary center, which is influencing our particular nation. And we see here, it will be, for most of us, London, Geneva, or New York, and for some in Asia and the Far East, Darjeeling and Tokyo. And you can see the interesting rays involved here. 3 first-ray centers, London, Tokyo, and Darjeeling, a very pure second-ray center, Geneva, and New York, a 6th-ray center, all from a planetary perspective. But the cities themselves may have different rays. Anyway, we work in relation to these planetary centers. We don't necessarily have to live there in that city, but it may influence us, depending upon our hemisphere. So you can attune with the ray and quality of the planetary center in which you, or under which you function. North and South America, of course, it's New York and England, United Kingdom, and all of the members of the former British Commonwealth and British Empire, under London and Geneva, working for Europe and Russia and probably a number of the nations that were part of the USSR. Tokyo for the Far East, and Darjeeling, another very pure center. Its energy has not yet been really awakened. It will be for India particularly, and the greater part of Asia. I'm not sure how much the Alice Bailey books have penetrated some of those areas, but to some degree, yes. So attune then with your particular planetary center according to where you live. Of course, you may consider yourself a world citizen, and we all strive towards that. But still, according to the country in which we live, we will be influenced by a particular planetary center. And the motto of these different centers will be important. You can find that in the Destiny of the Nations. Right now, London is, or England, United Kingdom, I serve, and I light the way for America. I'll have to refresh myself on the others, but there's a very pure expression of love through Geneva. So there they are, and each one of us is subject to one of these centers. We have a responsibility to respond to one of these 5 centers. 5th root race, 5 centers. 6th root race, probably 6, and 7th root race, probably 7. So now, think of your nation. Your nation in which at least in the more advanced nations, the causal body is being really built and focused upon. How can you help the soul of your nation emerge, its best qualities? Your responsibility to your nation. Of course, you have a responsibility to all of humanity, but, to be practical and specific, you live somewhere in a certain psychic ray and astrological atmosphere, and we all have a responsibility to the soul emergence within our particular nation. So how we'll have some pondering, how can you help the soul of your nation emerge, and how can you help bend its personality qualities to the service of the soul, so that its personality qualities are no longer obstructive. We'll have a few moments of silence as we think about that and our own responsibility to our nation and to the planetary center under which our nation functions. even if it's just in a little way, which is almost inevitable for us, somehow we can help the soul of our nation to emerge and the personality tendencies of our nation to align with the soul objectives. We can play our own little part there, and so can our groups. In our thought, what can we do? In our actions, what can we do? And of course, your particular soul ray doesn't have to be the same ray as the soul ray of your nation, or as the major ray of the planetary center which conditions your nation. If it's the same, then it can be reinforced, and if it's a different ray, it can be a sub-ray of the general purpose that is expressed by the soul ray of your nation and by the major center. This is us taking a larger degree of responsibility for that group in which we find ourselves, called a nation, an integral part of humanity. So let us remember we do have, however tiny it may be, a responsibility to our nation and to the expression of its soul quality and to the building of its causal body. And we know that when a sufficient level of causal body development, of egoic lotus development, is reached, the nation in question can have its own esoteric school, its own outlet for the hierarchical understanding and perspective. So we develop, what's called increasingly a world consciousness. And, what is a world disciple? Well, may we become that one day. It is an initiate of the third degree, whose influence has an effect not only in his nation but in the world. So we move towards that. You can say that certainly Alice Bailey was a world disciple, Roberto Assagioli a world disciple, the Dalai Lama, of course, maybe Bishop Tutu, Mother Teresa, all that, a global influence. And by assuming responsibility to our nation, and from that responsibility to the emergence of the soul quality of humanity, in this case the fourth ray of beauty, love, harmony, the Buddhic quality, we can move towards becoming the world disciple. And all of this is done for the sake of the Christ energy, so that His great second-ray quality can permeate all of us, every nation, every planetary center, and the redemption of humanity towards which He is working can be successful, and we can play our own tiny little part in that. The energy of the great Lord permeating the expression of every nation, and finally the expression of humanity. And that all depends on us, little people, whether that Christ energy permeates us and is expressed through us in our own little environment. All the flags of nations will create a great arrangement, all representing an ideal. Probably the soul of the nation is represented in the flag. This is not all of them, of course, but we have to one day get an image of them all together. Maybe we can do that. And now, friends, we will listen to the great invocation, which expresses a great ideal, that of the unity of humanity and its responsiveness to the Masters and the divine plan. friends, thank you for your participation in this discussion and meditation. Of course, when you think of it, you can't have much of a discussion when on a broadcast, but when we do webinars, of course, we can. But I'll discuss it with myself, and hopefully there'll be some benefit for all of us. Yeah, I had the volume up a little high there. But anyway, we will now move on just a few little slides more, and we'll call it an evening. Keep in mind your nation. It's meant to be a beautiful unity, contributing to the world harmony of nations. We're a long way from that, but the age of the water bearer, the Aquarian age, will bring us closer into the expression of universality, which will work out in the harmony of the nations. And so, just a few thoughts, a few slides more, and that'll be all for this evening. Many blessings, and Tuya will be back tomorrow with the attraction of money for hierarchical purposes. It's 5 p.m. GMT. Bye for now.